Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to another edition of the Boardroom Brief. Here today, I'm excited to talk to Shung Chieh, visiting us actually from San Francisco. Conversation with you today is going to be talking about your career, how you started here in Toronto, how you moved down to San Francisco. And so it's a pleasure to have you. Maybe to kick things off, we'd love to hear about, where are you from? Tell us about, where you went to school and maybe kind of the early steps in your career that led you down to the United States.
So I grew up in Waterloo,
Mhm.
went to University of Waterloo. I spent probably 15 years there, or close to 15 years.
Mhm.
I ended up at grad school in the US and then somehow kind of stayed in the US. I didn't originally go to grad school in San Francisco. I actually went not too far from here, but after grad school, I ended up in Oregon, and then Oregon somehow made my
Gotcha.
way to San Francisco.
When was it when you left Canada and tell us about that experience?
Yeah, I left Canada in 1990.
Mhm.
And actually, looking back on it, the reason I left was to go to grad school.
Mhm.
But the reason I went to grad school is because the economy wasn't great at that time. And I had been interviewing for jobs and then applying to grad school
Mhm.
and was trying to weigh, whether I should stay or go to grad school or, stay here for a job.
Mhm.
The only jobs I could get at the time were IT jobs
Mhm.
for, I think, telecom,
Mhm.
and that wasn't that exciting. And so when I got a offer to go to school in the States,
Mhm.
interesting field, I just jumped at that chance.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So from then your schooling in the United States,
Yeah.
what was that first opportunity or first job rather that came to you and maybe helped keep you in?
Yeah. So out of grad school, I ended up getting a job at Hewlett Packard.
Gotcha.
And Hewlett Packard back in those days actually had semiconductor fabs. So I went to the States and studied semiconductor physics and device fabrication, things like that.
Hmm.
And interestingly enough, I went to school in upstate New York, and the weather in upstate New York isn't that great.
Hmm.
And HP had its large fabs in Oregon,
Hmm.
and the only place that they could attract people were places that had worse weather than Oregon, and certainly upstate New York qualified for that.
Right.
They, for some reason, had a pipeline to upstate New York, and I ended up, there.
Hmm. I guess, was that your first job then out of school?
That was my first job out of school. Interesting story there is that I interviewed, and then somehow my last year of school took a little longer, so they ended up waiting for me for about a year,
No way.
and I was surprised that they still took me.
Okay.
But yeah, that's how I ended up there.
So semiconductor industry, obviously
Yeah,
very relevant today,
yeah,
right? With everything we're talking about in regards to NVIDIA and AI.
yeah.
What was the scene like then?
Obviously, today for semiconductors, especially for fab stuff,
Hmm.
it's all out of Taiwan or China.
Hmm.
But back in those days, each of these companies, a lot of them had their own fabs.
Hmm.
AMD included,
Hmm.
Hewlett Packard,
Hmm.
certainly Intel, of course.
Hmm.
In those years, you could tell that the industry was changing,
Hmm.
and that was part of the reason that I ended up shifting later in later years away from what I was doing.
Okay.
And that was also very challenging because, semiconductors is something I knew a lot about. And
Hmm.
then other stuff, it was a little bit uncomfortable to shift away from that.
Mm.
You could see, that industry in the early 90s was undergoing huge change
Mm.
just from this globalization and,
Mhm.
offshoring.
And so with you starting off in the semiconductor industry, early 90s, being in the US, what was the perspective that you may have had about staying in the US versus potentially coming back to Toronto?
Oh, yeah. Well, with that industry changing over the years, there was a big push to Asia.
Hmm.
And so at that time, I had a couple choices. One was early in that journey, there was actually some fab consolidation,
Hmm.
and HP was consolidating its fabs to Colorado. At the same time, they started a joint venture company called Chartered Semiconductor in Singapore. And so at that time, even there, I had a choice whether to try to go to Asia or migrate in the U.S.
Hmm.
There weren't really any options in Canada
Mm.
at that time. There were a few companies that were kind of like starting to get big and stuff like
Yeah.
that. ATI was certainly one of them.
Yeah.
And of course, you had the telecoms, but that was still different enough.
Yeah.
So even then, I didn't really have an option to go to Canada. It was only later that that became a thing
Mhm.
and interesting.
And so then can you tell us about a decision or two that you made that kept you in the US? Was there a position that came up that maybe pulled you down? Because you're in Silicon Valley, you've
Yeah,
been,
yeah.
yeah.
So I think the decision to go to Silicon Valley was another one that was clearly job related. But in Oregon, I lived in a town that was dominated by Hewlett Packard,
Hmm.
and it was clear to continue one's career. There was really only one choice.
Hmm.
I made a decision to try to target the Bay Area because I didn't move to the Bay Area until around the mid 2000s.
Hmm.
But that was clearly motivated because it was the hub of all technology and innovation. It was clearly career
Hmm.
driven. Yeah.
Hmm. So maybe thinking then again about your career and the early stages of your career. I mean, one thing that I find, in our work at Toronto Global, when we go out and speak to companies and speak to Canadian expats abroad, there's always a couple decisions that, a bit of a inflection point or maybe a little bit risky at the time that obviously proved quite,
Yeah.
well timed in hindsight.
Yeah.
Are there any kind of decisions that you made early on in your career that felt risky, but proved almost foundational later on?
Yeah. Well, it was that first one away from kind of deep semiconductor
Okay.
stuff. And that took me, I would say, months to make that decision.
Oh yeah.
It really seems scary because, something that you know very well is very familiar, very comfortable.
Hmm.
I ended up doing something which I had very little expertise in. So I ended up kind of shifting to design and circuit design and kind of higher level stuff.
Hmm.
And that was a lot of hard work trying to learn the new technology. But in the end, that got me comfortable with change
Hmm.
and transitions. And as you said, it was really foundational to the rest of my career.
Understood. And so, did you have any other classmates or any people in your network, maybe back in Canada, that from a talent perspective, you would have like? Was this just a trend that you found Canadian talent, especially in the chip side, was maybe looking towards the U.S.?
I was fortunate that in the early days, I ended up at companies that had great talent, like
Hmm.
Hewlett Packard back in the day. The engineers were, spectacular.
Hmm.
Even then, I remember my classmates and all the other young folk that was interacting with, and clearly Canadian talent is world class,
Hmm.
but I didn't appreciate it at the time. But certainly, after seeing folks from all over, the Canadian talent, uh, because it's world class, I got to find a way to connect back.
Being a Canadian expat in the U.S., how did that shape how you were kind of? Was it anything like? Did you feel that you have to kind of integrate more within the team? Was there any significant cultural differences?
I'm sure you asked that question a lot. You probably get probably a lot of similar answers. The first thing that struck me was that I used to say out and about
Sure. Yeah.
differently, and I'm sure I say it differently now.
Yeah.
That was probably the first. So I remember the first week of grad school, and I would walk around and people would just say out and about
Yeah.
when I'm around.
Yeah.
And it took me a while. And then I asked somebody next to me, I said, why are they doing that? And
Mhm.
she said, they're making fun of you.
Oh, okay. That's funny. The Canadian accent.
The Canadian accent. And,
Mhm.
and so I lost that pretty quick.
Mhm.
But I mean, that was the first thing that jumped out.
Gotcha.
And then aside from that, nobody else could tell that you're Canadian. I mean,
Right.
it's really hard unless you start to ask more questions. But
Absolutely. Yeah. I find that when I go down to the Bay Area, for example, and speaking to folks, I'm always coming across these secret Canadians
yes.
who may not have it so outwardly that they are from Canada
Yeah.
originally, but then you kind of dive in, and it's usually there's some tells where they pronounce Mississauga correctly,
Yes.
and you're like, there's no way you know that unless you're a Canadian. So maybe going back again to kind of the evolution of your career, you
Yeah.
you started off, you had your education initially at the University of Waterloo. You kind of found these opportunities within New York and Oregon, but you've been living in the Bay Area for quite a while,
18 years now.
18 years.
Yeah.
So what was that job that pulled you to Silicon Valley?
Yeah, so the job that pulled me to Silicon Valley was also my first kind of exec position.
Okay.
Found that position because at Hewlett Packard we had acquired a small company, and I became friends with the founder of that
Mhm.
company.
Mhm.
Also, around that time, I was going through so the companies I was with, they were going through a lot of structural changes.
Mhm.
I called this guy up and I said, well, I'm kind of looking.
Mhm.
And it was because of him that I ended up in the Bay Area. So I ended up at a small company,
Mm.
whereas previously all the companies have been rather large.
Mhm.
There was kind of an accident through relationships that I built
Gotcha.
previously. Yeah.
Well, I think the relationships theme is something that we'll dig
Yeah.
into, especially for Silicon Valley. But having that perspective of that time, being from Canada and now being in the Silicon Valley, can you tell us about maybe the differences that you viewed in the ecosystems? Probably quite significant.
The thing that Silicon Valley has going is, as you said, it's mostly relationship driven.
Mhm.
The actual tech part is of course there,
Mhm.
but it's really a network effect where you've got really, really talented, intelligent folks, and they're, down the street, you see them all the time. That concentration of talent is really, really important.
Mhm.
Toronto certainly has all of those things.
Mhm.
There's great university in town,
Mhm.
really friendly for immigration policies.
Mhm.
And then I would say now that there's a critical mass of companies and talent,
Mhm.
Toronto's really got all the same ingredients.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So then, as you're kind of moving into these leadership roles within Silicon Valley, have there been moments where you've maybe, apart from the accent, you've brought some kind of distinctly Canadian ideas or perspectives into your
Yeah.
leadership roles?
I think that there's a style of leadership that's quite different,
Mm.
that's shaped by Canada and background.
Mhm.
Bay Area is full of huge personalities,
Mm.
as you can imagine,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of, really big egos.
Mhm.
Thing about Canada, I think, is that there's a quiet competence
Mm.
that's here.
Mhm.
The style is different.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So then maybe jumping ahead a little bit,
Yeah.
again, seeing the changes that you've seen within the Bay Area and coming back here to Toronto, how have you seen kind of the successive generations of Canadian
Mhm.
Waterloo graduates, for example, coming down to the Bay Area? Have you seen kind of the ecosystems come closer together? How have you seen them change?
Yeah, so it's really exciting to see the community of Canadians in the Bay Area.
Hmm.
I can't say that I'm that plugged into it, but
Sure.
as you mentioned, there are all sorts of tells, and you can tell when you
Hmm.
run into a Canadian
Hmm.
in the Bay Area. In terms of generational change, the new folks, well, there's a generational thing regardless of Canada and the U.S.,
Hmm.
but I really like I would say the young folk coming in from Canada are a lot more ambitious, especially the ones that come to the Bay Area.
Hmm.
The one thing the Bay Area has going for it is that there are a lot of people with big visions,
Hmm.
big ideas.
Hmm.
And I would say that the Canadians that end up in Silicon Valley certainly, fit that mold.
Gotcha. So would you say that one of the kind of mindset shifts that Canadians might need to go through when they're looking to relocate to Silicon Valley is one of it just being a bit more outward and
Yeah, for sure. I think that I mean that's something that I still have trouble with
yeah,
is being outward.
yeah.
And certainly in the Silicon Valley, there is an element of being outward that
Hmm.
is important.
Hmm.
At the same time, I think it's really important to still stay authentic to values and roots, and that's and generally folks from Canada, even in the Bay Area, there's still an idealism that's
Hmm.
present
Hmm. Canadian
in
pride.
Canadian pride for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
absolutely. Maybe moving back to your career and kind of going back to that point where you first back went down to Silicon Valley. Tell us a little bit about kind of the maybe companies and even some of the startups that you've moved.
Yeah, so when I ended up in the Silicon Valley,
Hmm.
I worked for a small company called Fairchild Imaging.
Of course. Okay.
And then Fairchild, surprisingly enough, was the kind of the parent of Fairchild Semiconductor.
Hmm.
But it was a small company, it was private at the time, and there's a whole story around Fairchild Imaging. But from Fairchild, I ended up at Micron Imaging.
Hmm.
Micron, of course, is the memory company
Hmm.
based out of Boise.
Hmm.
And then they had spun out a company called Aptina. And I had after Fairchild, I actually joined Aptina, but had roots in micron imaging, and so I've been through a lot of acquisitions. So that's probably quite evident. So Aptina had got acquired by On Semiconductor,
Right.
and then after On, I ended up at a small company called Inscopix,
Where we met.
where we met. That's right. Inscopix was a crazy company that was doing microscopy on live animals, and they were trying to support neuroscience. So that was a very interesting change also from this whole journey. After that, I also tried to start my own company, which was doing imaging for construction. And then after that, I ended up at the last company, or the most recent company called Icon Therapeutics, which was using imaging for drug discovery.
Right. So, incredible journey, in the sense that I think a lot of people who maybe in Silicon Valley, people see kind of that journey as a bit more typical.
Yeah.
But again, looking at that lens of being a Canadian Silicon Valley, do you feel that that kind of moving from company to company, startup, different sizes of companies, would that have been possible for you at the time in Canada, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly in the early days, that was probably not something I would have thought was possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say that I know that much about what's going on in Toronto, but it's certainly worlds different than when I left. There's certainly a different energy, and certainly with all the companies that
Yes.
that have that you've helped come to Toronto. It's certainly different today.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's something that so I've been at Toronto Global, as I said to you, about 7 years,
Yeah.
and so I've been lucky enough to kind of see a couple of like mini cycles, and I think that there's something really compelling about speaking to Canadian leaders who left,
Yeah.
several years on, and you built up your careers and coming back, kind of looking again at your career and how you're here, and kind of visiting back in Toronto, and how do you see the current moments of Toronto talent, Toronto tech? If you were coming out of University of Waterloo today, do you see that you still would have been pulled down to Silicon Valley?
No, I think if I were graduate today,
Hmm.
I certainly probably wouldn't be pulled to Silicon Valley.
And tell me more about that.
I had left in the middle of a kind of a mini recession at the
Hmm.
time,
Hmm.
and then, as I said, the only job that I had access to was an IT like job.
Hmm.
The opportunities were way different back
Hmm.
then than they are today. I think that the ecosystem that's in Toronto today is really exciting and energizing.
Hmm.
And Silicon Valley will always be there. Will certainly draw talent,
Hmm.
but Silicon Valley is also going through its thing. It's dominated by the large company, the large tech companies, and in terms of small and startups, it's actually pretty challenging to get one. Well, it's certainly challenging to scale.
Hmm.
Probably not challenging to start up, but
Hmm.
as you're well aware, the hard part is that scaling part.
Absolutely. So then I would say, maybe if you can forecast a little bit, again, looking at your time in Silicon Valley in the US, seeing Toronto as it is now, understanding that, there is something that maybe we would have kept
Yeah,
a version of you here.
yeah.
How do you see Toronto moving forward? If you could maybe advise the current leaders within Toronto and Canada about, a way to kind of keep our momentum going,
Okay.
right? And you don't have to limit it to just Toronto as well, but maybe a
A
Canada.
Canada-wide
Yeah.
question. But I think there is a moment now. The US used to dominate global politics and technology for sure.
Hmm.
But I think that the current environment is a lot more challenging for that.
Hmm.
And I think that Toronto and Canada actually has an opportunity to step on the global stage
Hmm.
in a way that perhaps wasn't true a couple of years ago.
Do you see that element as kind of, again, the talent that we have, the maturity of the companies that we have within the Canadian ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that none of that would be possible without all of that, but I think all those ingredients are there today, and it's really more about a mindset or attitude.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So then I guess, maybe kind of to look to the current moment again,
Yeah.
for yourself, on a more personal note, you've worked across a wide range of really exciting companies. You've been at the startup stage to the large enterprises. As you look ahead, how do you view your own career and kind of the impact that maybe you'd like to, continue to have within the sectors that you work in?
Yeah.
And maybe any advice for the next generation of Waterloo grads, for example?
Today, I think what I'm looking for is helping others.
Mhm.
And certainly the idea of connecting Canadians and Americans, and actually, frankly, the rest of the world
Mhm.
is really exciting and interesting.
Mhm.
In terms of the advice, having been in tech all my life,
Mhm.
used to think it was about the technology and the innovation part.
Mhm.
Actually, today, I would say it's really about the people
Mm.
and the relationships.
Mhm.
And so, if I could advise anybody, it would be to always remember that it's people
Mhm.
who drive everything.
Absolutely. Well, I think here at Toronto Global, when and you've known this in the interaction that we had over the years, which I'm very grateful for, the relationships and conversations that we have with founders is really central to what we do at Toronto Global. We provide information, we help operationally, but at the end of the day, the relationships that we help connect and build with founders like you really I think helps drive kind of the investment decisions to kind of look back. In your case, as a Canadian, to kind of look back and say this is an opportunity for my U.S. company to invest back into Canada, but also as we build relationships with Americans and kind of
Yeah.
being able to bring forward you as kind of people who've seen both sides is invaluable to the work that we do. So thank you very much for taking the time for this conversation today. It's been fascinating to hear from you as a leader who's came from Canada, moved to the U.S., built your career. Again, have to thank you for coming.
Well, I always appreciate talking to you, and I think you've done a wonderful job at bridging between the two countries and specifically the Bay Area. And I certainly hope that this relationship will continue on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again.